Halo Pak Agung, sepertinya Prof Kuo perlu dijadikan co-host dulu. Barangkali beliau mau share PPT jadinya bisa. Beliau masih ini biasa, masih partisipan biasa. Jadi mungkin dibuat co-host dulu Pak Agung. Terima kasih.
Ya, siapa Ali? Siapa Ali?
Ya, terima kasih Pak Agung.
Okay, are you guys ready? Okay, good. 我们准备好了哈。Today we will talk about metabolism. 我们今天开始会讲新陈代谢。Before I get into metabolism, I would like to give you, sorry, I'd like to give you some important knowledge about cells. If you think about the original life on Earth, that we actually don't know when the life is already start, okay? But there are one thing for sure is that the life already start when the air has full of carbon dioxide and low oxygen, okay? So that means the life can be generated under the environment that has very low oxygen. Okay, so that is very important message. And when we start to have life, when life start to thrive, then you see some of plant can do photosynthesis. And that is the starting point to transform carbon dioxide into oxygen. Okay, so that also gives us very important idea that the atmosphere oxygen and carbon dioxide profile can change according to the life in the planet, okay, on Earth. Okay, just give you one example. You know algae, right? You know algae, 藻类知道吗? So at very beginning, algae start to grow in the ocean. Okay, and algae is actually some of the algae are unicellular, and some of the algae are multicellular. And the algae has photosynthesis capability to extract energy from the sunlight. Okay, and then that is going to change the entire oxygen concentration level on Earth. Okay, so you want to, the reason I talk about this is because you want to understand that the life can occur without oxygen. Okay, that is very important knowledge for you. Okay, and therefore when you grow bacteria, normally the bacteria use 5% oxygen. Okay, if you, some of the bacteria cannot survive if the oxygen is too high. Okay, so you also want to know that the oxygen is toxic to some of cell. Okay, how about human cell? If you look at human cell, okay, you can see some of the cell are very big and some of the cell are small, right? And you also want to know one thing, that if you look at the replicable cell, for example, stem cell, it's grow under low oxygen environment. Okay, and also you want to know that if you increase the oxygen in your body, the stem cell has two fates. One is die, and another destination is to differentiate. Okay, so you want to keep in mind that the cell in our body are very diverse. Some of the cells are rely on anaerobic metabolism, and some of the cells are rely on aerobic metabolism. Okay, what kind of the cell are rely on anaerobic metabolism? Mostly stem cell. Okay, so this is very important knowledge for you to understand before we get into the topic of metabolism. Okay, in the stem cell, the size, what is the size of the stem cell? Let me just show you a picture here. This is what we have done in our lab. Okay. All right. Right here. Okay. If you look at this. This is the muscle cross section. Okay. 看到吗？有看到了吗？ Okay. So if you look at the pre-PLA right here, this is placebo before exercise. Okay. And you see this is the cross section of myofiber, human muscle. Okay. And this is big, right? This is big. So you want to know that the muscle cells are big. But if you look at the brown spot right here, this is the satellite cell. Okay, satellite cell is a stem cell which can donate nucleus to the myocyte. Okay, so if the myocyte, if the muscle fiber get damaged, then you have the cell, the stem cell right here is able to donate nucleus, just throw into the space of the myofiber. Then you have the muscle regeneration. Okay, but please let me know, what is the size of this stem cell? Can you see that? What is the size of the stem cell? 你看那个干细胞的 size 有多大？相对于肌纤维。So what is the size relative to a single myofiber? It's very small, right? This is very small, right? So you want to know that the cells in our body are very diverse, and some are small and some are big. And I would like to give you the fact that this small brown spot is rely on anaerobic metabolism. So that means glycolysis is dominating the ATP synthesis pathway. However, in the myofiber, anaerobic metabolism is the main source of ATP production. Okay? Okay, let me just give you another important knowledge right here. If you look at the right side right here, okay, just look at PLA, the white color. Immediately after exercise, the PEG7 means the muscle stem cell, which we normally call satellite cell. Okay, the muscle stem cell decreases by about 30% immediately after exercise. Okay, so that gives you the idea that the contracting muscle demands the stem cell. Okay, so the stem cell drop 30% immediately after exercise. But the stem cell will come back in 3 hours. And the reason that this recovery are so fast is because we have bone marrow cell that is replenish the stem cell in the myofiber. Okay, so you also want to know that most of the cell in bone marrow are more rely on anaerobic metabolism. Okay. Okay. So if you have no problem, then I will go on. Okay. So whether your system requires can survive with oxygen or without oxygen. One of the major difference is whether or not you have mitochondria. Okay, so if the cell has no mitochondria, then you can sustain your ATP production only from anaerobic metabolism. We call glycolysis. Okay, so that means the most of the stem cell are more rely on anaerobic metabolism. Although stem cell has some mitochondria, but relatively speaking, the mitochondrial number are very small compared to the mature myofiber. Okay. Oh, Ali, you can speak Indonesian to your student. The content we just described. Okay.
Okay, Lause. Oke, jadi hari ini Prof. Ko berbicara tentang metabolisme di dalam tubuh dan beliau menyatakan bahwa glycolysis atau metabolisme yang sifatnya anaerob itu dia mendominasi, kan ada statement begini bahwa karbohidrat adalah sumber energi utama. Nah, ini salah satu jawabannya mengapa, karena di dalam tubuh kita ada sel yang mana sel itu belum menjadi sel otot atau sel saraf atau sel-sel lainnya yang ada di dalam tubuh kita. Tapi sel itu istilahnya itu sel bahan begitu. Sel bahan itu disebut dengan stem cell. Kalau nggak salah tulisannya itu STEM, stem cell. Nah, stem cell ini dia diproduksi oleh sumsum tulang kita, dan stem cell ini kalau tadi Prof. Ko menunjukkan ada grafik, itu contoh dari preparat dari otot rangka yang dipotong melintang, dan tadi kalau ada tanda panah yang menunjukkan ke titik, sebuah titik itu adalah yang disebut dengan stem cell. Jadi ukurannya relatif sangat kecil dibandingkan sel otot, karena yang diambil contoh adalah sel otot pada normalnya begitu. Dan stem cell ini dia hanya mendapatkan energi dari sistem energi anaerob begitu. Tadi di awal juga Prof. Ko membuat statement bahwa adanya kehidupan itu jika karbon dioksida itu berinteraksi dengan apa tadi ya, paling lupa, nanti mungkin Cek Via bisa menambahkan, dan itu terdapat pada tanaman laut yang disebut alga. Ya, jadi alga itu adalah tanaman laut yang mana sifatnya dia bisa uniseluler kayak gitu. Dia menggunakan sistem energi anaerob tanpa bantuan dari oksigen yang ada. Dia hanya membutuhkan tadi karbon dioksida dan kemudian bantuan dari sinar UV yang tembus ke laut, dan dia kemudian bisa memproduksi energinya dan dia bisa tumbuh begitu. Jadi kalau orang biokimia bilang bahwa awal mula dari kehidupan ya jika karbon dioksida ketemu sunlight gitu ya, dan di situ ada air, ada H2O, dan di situ ada interaksi molekuler. Nah, disitulah ada kehidupan. Begitu. Lause, I did explain to my student. I think you now can go further. You still unmute yourself, Lause.
Okay, yeah. let me show you another photo right here. This is also the sample from the lab that we published 2 years ago. You can see right here, this, on the right side, you see this is a myofiber, right? This is myofiber. Okay. And if you look at the stem cell on the corner, okay, it's very small. Okay. And then we have discovered that in young individual, like Ali, your student, okay, their muscle looks like this. But if you look at the stem cell in their body, you can see that about 50% of the stem cell has different degree of senescence. Senescence means age. Okay, so many people think the stem cell should be relatively younger, right? But actually not. The stem cell can age. If the stem cell have replication frequencies very high, after 50 generation, the stem cell will get old. So although they are still stem cell, but their replicable rate is going to drop. Okay? 有听得懂吗？好。
Lasso, may I have a question?
Sure.
So when you said that the stem cell will get old when it already replicate itself for 50 times, you said, right?
Yeah.
So
Depending on what kind of cell, yeah.
depending on what kind of cell. But then when we talk about the time, like maybe in minute, the unit of time, or probably in hour or in a day. So how much time do they need to replicate themselves until 50 times?
It depends on what type of the cell. Okay. The experiment has been done by a scientist in San Diego, I believe. It has used the fibroblast, and they have found that if your replicable cycle is over 50, then the cell can still replicate, but it's very slow. Okay, and eventually they found that the reason for the slow down is because of the accumulation of DNA damage. Okay, so if you have the DNA damage, then you start to have a mechanism that is starting to inhibit the cell proliferation. So that is what happened on that. But you want to know that the cancer cell in human body, they can overcome this problem. Okay, so that means even you have DNA damage, okay, and you have that mechanism is elevated. The gene governing that mechanism might have the mutation, and then the cell can still replicate. But the problem is when the cell replicate under DNA damage, it's going to have all sort of mutation. So that mechanism is also important for the tumor. Okay, this is our research topic, but it's not the content we are going to cover today. So the point today is just to give you the idea that the cell in our body are diverse. Some are rely on only anaerobic metabolism, and some are rely on aerobic metabolism as well. Okay, so let's go back to okay, just okay, finish this. So we will go to the metabolism. Okay. 好，我们今天开始要讲新陈代谢的部分。Okay, when you talk about anaerobic metabolism, then you want to understand that this is highly conserved in virtually all species on Earth. Okay, so that means the human cell has glycolysis. The bacteria also have glycolysis. Okay, let me explain what is the glycolysis. Glycolysis is a metabolic pathway that convert glucose into lactate. And during this period, during this process, there were ATP generated for use. Okay. Let's go to the page 449, 449页. 449. Okay. Can you go to 449? Okay. Okay, if you see this screen, the first impression is that you see the athlete, right? It's running a 200-meter final. And you know this guy, right? It's very famous from Jamaica, right? And this picture gives you a link that if you want to do any sprinting, 200 meter and 100 meter, then you are consuming a lot of ATP. And during this process, your ventilation, your oxygen supply to your body are still at very low rate, right? And therefore, the huge amount of ATP production is almost impossible coming from aerobic metabolism, right? So if you look at what is anaerobic metabolism, it's just look at the graph right here. You see the purple, the pink color, that is the myofiber, right? And you see the bar, the yellow box. You see the conversion of glucose into pyruvate and lactate. It occurs outside mitochondria. Okay, you see there's the mitochondria right here, right? Have you seen mitochondria right here? Okay, you see the CO2 plus H2O, that is the mitochondria right here. Okay, this is mitochondria. Okay, and you see the glycolysis is occurred outside mitochondria. Okay, and during this process, glycolysis, you have ATP production to supply fast muscle contraction. Okay, so you have two sources to supply ATP. One source is from the cytosol. It's called glycolysis. And another source is coming from the mitochondria it supplies ATP for the muscle contraction. So I'm sure most of you know that which source provide more ATP for muscle contraction. Very good. Aerobic mitochondria, right? But which one provide fast supply of ATP?
Glycolysis, Prof.
That's right, glycolysis. Because when you have a muscle contraction and the air, the oxygen has not arrived to your muscle tissues, the mitochondria has no respiration, then you are already consuming a lot of ATP. So if you're talking about all sports event, most of the sports event are very fast, and therefore glycolysis are very important metabolic pathway to sustain your fast muscle contraction. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the glycolysis. Okay, so let me ask you the question. You see glucose right here, right? The glycolysis starting from glucose, right? And where is the glucose from? 葡萄糖从哪边来？
Well, the glucose can be from glycogen in the muscle, and also
Very
can
good.
be from the blood glucose in the bloodstream, and
Yes,
maybe
that's very good.
from the outside, like the beverage or the food that we eat.
Yeah. Okay, good. 有听到吗？有没有听到阿里讲话？没有听到。OK。好，那我把这个拔掉好了。OK， 我刚刚问的一个问题就是那个，你看到这个葡萄糖在这边吗？哈，在左上角，对不对？葡萄糖从哪边来？甘糖一个 ，good， 还有呢？血液 ，OK， so that is good answer that the glucose come from two direction. One is glycogen inside the cell, okay, and another source is outside the cell in plasma, right? Then the question is, which source are readily available?
Glycogen in the muscle.
Yes, exactly. 实际上，甘糖是最快的来源，因为甘糖已经储存在细胞内部。So we are going to talk about glycogen later, and you want to keep in mind that although during muscle contraction, the glucose transport from plasma inside the cell would also increase, but the rate of the glucose supply are very, very slow. And you cannot rely on this source to sustain your muscle contraction. Okay? So this is one thing you want to know. So glycogen are very important energy source to supply glucose for glycolysis. Okay? Not from the plasma. Okay? Not the glucose from plasma. Okay. Just a second. Sorry. Okay. You also want to know that the product of glycolysis is lactate, right? Okay. So the final product for glycolysis is lactate. And therefore, you want to regard lactate as an indicator of anaerobic metabolism. OK， 所以乳酸它是什么指标？对，它是无氧代谢的指标。好，乳酸不是疲劳的指标。好 So you want to know that lactate is indicative of anaerobic metabolism, but not fatigue indicator. Okay, so lactate is not the indicator for fatigue. There are many people make the mistake on that. That is based on the hypothesis about 50 years ago, and now it's proven wrong. That lactate is not the causes of fatigue. And in fact, that if you don't have the lactate production, you cannot sustain your anaerobic metabolism. OK， 所以实际上，如果说你没有办法产生乳酸的话，你的速度会被迫变慢，那才是疲劳的发生。If you have any way to accelerate or allow the mass production of lactate, then you will be able to sustain your high speed muscle contraction for a longer period. Okay, would you like to translate?
Ya, Allah, sir. Oke, tadi setelah berbicara tentang stem cell dan bahwa stem cell itu tadi disampaikan bahwa dia hanya mendapatkan energi dari anaerobic system. Nah, kemudian sekarang kita lanjut ke proses glikolisis yang mana glikolisis ini merupakan sistem penyedia energi yang sifatnya tidak membutuhkan oksigen dalam prosesnya. Kalau kalian lihat apa yang sekarang ada di layar kaca kalian, terutama di proses yang gambar kotak ini merupakan visualisasi dari sarkomer. Jadi yang warna pink tebel itu ibaratnya adalah myosin, sedangkan pink tipis ibaratnya adalah aktin. Jadi itu kan sarkomer di dalam serabut otot. Glikolisis ini terjadi di sitoplasma, bukan ada di dalam mitokondria. Dan glikolisis ini, proses ini menyediakan ATP untuk sumber energi otot rangka berkontraksi. Hasil akhir dari proses glikolisis adalah laktat. Nah, kemudian pertanyaannya adalah bahan yang dipakai untuk proses glikolisis itu apa? Ada dua di dalam tubuh kita. Yang pertama yaitu glikogen, yang kedua adalah gula darah. Ya, maka pertanyaan selanjutnya adalah antara glikogen dan gula darah ini mana yang paling cepat bisa digunakan untuk menyediakan energi? Yang pertama adalah glikogen, tetapi ini bukan glikogen yang ada di dalam hati, tetapi adalah glikogen yang tersedia di dalam otot rangka. Gitu. Jadi kalau kita mempertimbangkan olahraga prestasi, maka sejatinya seorang atlet itu diharapkan memiliki pasokan glikogen di dalam otot yang banyak, karena itu dibutuhkan untuk performa mereka. Hola, sir. I did explain to them.
Thank you. Okay, now you have look at this. Okay, this is look at here. Okay, this is glucose, 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygen, right? And you have a glycolysis. And if you have enough oxygen right here, you see right here, this is oxygen. Okay, so when you have oxygen, then the pyruvate will not go to lactate much because it is going to go for a degradation into carbon dioxide and H2O. Okay, so whether or not your pyruvate goes to lactate or goes to aerobic metabolism is depending on the oxygen availability. Okay, let me translate. 看到这张图，葡萄糖呢，它要完全分解，把能量释放出来，它在动物细胞有下面2条路，一个是变成乳酸，另外一个是完全的氧化变成2氧化碳跟水。那决定它走哪一条路，是看氧气够不够。所以当氧气不够，你就自动走下一条路。Okay. So Ali, have you translate to your student?
Oke, Lause. Jadi tambahannya tadi Pak Ali sampai bahwa laktat merupakan produk akhir dari proses glikolisis. Ya, laktat ini sekarang terbukti bukan sebagai indikator kelelahan. Banyaknya laktat yang ada di dalam tubuh kita adalah semata-mata bahwa tubuh kita ini melakukan proses glikolisis yang lebih dominan dibandingkan aerobik. Begitu. Anaerob daripada aerobik. Nah, kemudian jika kalian lihat di layar kaca kalian, berubahnya pirufat menjadi laktat itu sebenarnya tergantung dari kehadiran oksigen, ya, adanya oksigen di dalam tubuh kita. Jika tubuh kita cukup akan oksigen, ya, maka laktat yang menjadi produk subakhir dari proses glikolisis ini akan dilanjutkan tidak menjadi laktat, ya, pirufat tidak menjadi laktat tetapi menjadi karbon dioksida dan air. Namun jika oksigen tidak ada, ya, di dalam tubuh kita oksigennya kurang, maka pirufat sebagai hasil subakhir dari proses glikolisis ini akan dirubah menjadi laktat, begitu. Yeah, Lause, you may go.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, keep in mind that you just mentioned that glucose is coming from mostly from muscle glycogen. The glycogen stored in muscle, inside the muscle cell. Okay. And if I ask you the question, where is the lactate coming from? Glucose, right? Right? So when you don't have oxygen, for example, if you are running for a competition at, let's say, 10K running, okay? And if you measure blood lactate for all different people, then you will see when is the time that you have highest lactate concentration. 如果你跑10000公尺，你在什么时候你血液中的乳酸浓度是最高的？ When is the time that you have the highest lactate concentration? At the beginning of the race or at the end of the race? Yes.
Beginning?
Yes, exactly. And the reason for that is you are continuously depleting your muscle glycogen, okay? And the glycogen availability is the highest at the beginning of the exercise and start to drop, right? So at the end of the exercise, when you cannot sustain your high speed muscle contraction, that is the time you have the shortage in muscle glycogen. And the muscle glycogen is the source of the lactate. And therefore, you have relatively lower lactate at the end of exercise compared to the beginning of the race. Okay, so here I just want to emphasize to give you the link between the glycogen and lactate. Okay, so especially during muscle contraction, during exercise, the lactate concentration is reflecting how much glycogen in your skeletal muscle. Okay, so let me ask you again. What factor determine your endurance during a competition? Lactate or glycogen? What is the energy source directly determine your whether or not you can sustain your exercise? Endurance.
I guess should be glycogen.
Yes, exactly. Glycogen is like the oil, the gasoline in your car, right? So you can use it immediately, right? And if you have a shortage in the oil, then the car cannot run. Right? So that is the example. Okay, so and you know when you drive your car, you have a smoke, right? You generate smoke, and the smoke is just like a lactate. So when you run your car and eventually you have no smoke, that means you are out of oil. You don't have a gasoline, right? So you don't want to say that the smoke is something related to the fatigue. Indirectly, the direct determinant is actually the oil for your endurance. Okay, let's take a 10 minutes break. Okay, 我们先休息10分钟。
10 menit istirahat. Ya. Jadi nanti Rivers atau Trahesa atau Aldi atau Aunur siapa saja, mungkin Wahyu, Faraditya, Dimas bisa tanyakan ya. Jadi hari ini pembahasannya adalah metabolisme dan metabolisme yang dibahas adalah anaerob. Terutama kita sedang berbicara tentang glikogen yang kemudian menjadi bahan untuk pembuatan ATP di dalam tubuh kita. Jadi tadi Prof Ko bertanya sebelum beliau istirahat. Pertanyaannya adalah begini. Jadi jika laktat itu merupakan bukan indikator dari kelelahan, melainkan indikator dari dominansi proses anaerobik dalam tubuh, maka indikator apa yang paling reliable untuk dipakai sebagai sebagai tolak ukur bahwa seseorang ini memiliki daya tahan yang baik. Apakah laktat atau glikogen? Jawabannya tadi adalah glikogen. Karena ya itu logis deh. Karena kalau kita berbicara laktat itu adalah produk akhir dari sistem glikolisis, dari sistem anaerobik ya, glikolisis anaerobik di dalam tubuh kita. Dan ketika molekulnya sudah terbentuk menjadi molekul laktat, maka proses urai laktat ini cukup panjang ya, sampai dengan 24 jam. Proses urai laktat ini disebut dengan sistem Cori. Maka laktat yang terbentuk selama otot kita berkontraksi, dia akan dibawa dulu oleh darah kita menuju ke hati, dan di dalam hati itu laktat kemudian diurai kembali menjadi glukosa. Baru kemudian bisa dipakai. Ya, tapi kalau kita berbicaranya saat itu sedang dalam olahraga, maka waktu segitu, waktu 24 jam itu ya sangat lama. Kayak gitu. Jadi makanya ini alasan mengapa laktat bukan menjadi indikator kelelahan. Laktat itu hanya indikator dominansi ya, indikator dominansi metabolisme glycolysis anaerob yang ada di dalam tubuh kita. Jadi kalau laktatnya tinggi, ya dia memang dominansinya anaerob. Nah, kalau glikogen ini adalah bahan dari proses glikolisis. Semakin banyak bahan yang kita miliki di dalam tubuh kita, maka proses glikolisis selama kita berolahraga atau selama kita latihan fisik itu tersedia dan otomatis demands atau kebutuhan ATP itu terpenuhi. Makanya kemudian jumlah banyak atau tidaknya glikogen di dalam tubuh seseorang ini menjadi penentu apakah orang ini memiliki daya tahan tubuh yang baik atau tidak, begitu. Endurance ya, maksudnya paling daya tahan di sini endurance. Begitu. Nah, ini punya waktu 10 menit untuk break. Silakan kalau mau minum dulu atau mau makan dulu, silakan. Kalau mau makan, ya tapi jauh gitu. Jadi makan cookie yang ada di samping kalian. Tunggu sebentar. Take your time. Rivers makan apa? Makan HP? Oh, makan cetutan kuku ya, pemotong kuku. Rivers.
Ya, ada.
Coba di-unmute coba. Rivers, halo?
Ya, halo, ada apa, Pak?
Ini nanti coba paling minta kamu show up begitu ya. Jadi supaya yang tanya jangan Pak Ali saja, tetapi kan di sini yang mahasiswanya kalian gitu. Jadi supaya beliau lebih excited lagi, maka paling minta ada Rivers, ada Trahesa, ada Aunur Rahman, dan yang lain silakan tanya.
Tapi Pak, sejujurnya itu saya itu lebih kesulitan fokus untuk mentranslate-nya dulu daripada memahaminya dulu, Pak. Loh. Dalam pelajaran.
Ali kira kamu jago.
Jadi kayak ya enggak terlalu jago, ya masih 10% paling.
Tapi kalau
jadi masih fokus nge-translate aja.
Kalau sama dibandingkan dengan Dr. Lian Yi, dia kan ngomongnya cepet banget.
Ya mendingan ini. ini Pak. Kalau Lian Yi, wah, sampai 5 jam, Pak.
Sampai 5 jam. Pamen tarik sis begitu ya, semongko. Semangat sampai bongko. Nah, ini Trahesa juga nanti paling minta untuk tanya gitu ya. Dan komting yang lainnya nih, Maya Putri apa siapa begitu. Minum dulu. Yeah, Ainur, you may go. Ya, jadi ini ada pertanyaan dari Rivos. Tanyanya begini, jadi kalau untuk latihan anaerob, itu sumber energi utama yang dipakai glukosa ya? Bukan ya. Kalau kita bicaranya glukosa itu maka asumsi kita adalah glukosa adalah gula darah. Jadi tadi disampaikan ada 2 sumber energinya, yaitu glikogen otot, ya bukan hati, glikogen otot, dan setelah glikogen otot itu pasokannya menurun, baru kemudian gula darah dia akan masuk ke dalam sel otot, bisa dipakai. Glikogen hati bagaimana Pak? Glikogen hati itu organ otot sama organ hati kan jauh ya, jadi maka dia juga perlu proses untuk membreakdown menjadi gula darah dulu, kemudian di bawah ke jaringan yang membutuhkan, di mana ini jaringan otot, baru bisa meresap, baru bisa masuk ke dalam sel otot. Maka kalau pertanyaannya adalah utamanya apa? Glikogen dulu. Ya bahkan nanti kalau kalian ketemu Pak Ali lagi di ilmu gizi olahraga, itu ada istilah untuk metode pemasokan glikogen di dalam tubuh. Istilahnya adalah karbohidrat loading. Ya, karbohidrat loading. Jadi metode ini dipakai untuk meningkatkan konten glikogen di dalam otot rangka. Dengan cara bagaimana? Ada istilahnya apa ya? Kayak modifikasi latihan maupun makanan yang dilakukan untuk bisa kita memasok glikogen di dalam tubuh itu. Nah, simpelnya bagaimana? Biasanya kalau untuk memasok glikogen di dalam tubuh yang lebih banyak, intensitas latihannya itu tinggi, dan proporsi makanan yang dimakan itu lebih banyak karbohidratnya ketimbang protein maupun lemak. Gitu. Itu sekilas saja.
马来西亚的学姐的话，极力挽留。我愿意为你开一个圈在学校，你知道吗？真的、啊。开什么？就是他说，如果你读完博士班，我直接帮你在学校安排一个助理教授位置，让你升上去，再慢慢升练一下。
可是他俩的目标不是要做教授。
对啊，但是他说，对，
他的意思是说，如果真的要的话，你也可以啊，
就是要啊，就是说，
做极限，
就是先弄不过存在呢。如果是小姐愿意做这样，
他俩有潜力啊，至少目前潜力是可以被逼出来的。人家国家会影响，
然后国家
菜鸟。
你要把自己想象成你是在水面上的一个球，把你压越低，你就会看起来越高。
你可以想象你是把1000块老师，
你就具象化，然后你就跟8号一样，游一游20分钟，20多分钟。
我宁愿死都不要游。那就是跟那个
6号一样，直接放弃人生，
直接放弃赎身。可是他现在进不来，到底为什么要这么急的？
可能老师觉得这里
还是可以吧，只要你有商业的需求。就现在只有中国，不管你什么领域，就是有吗？
有啊，你知道现在中国人
现在新生就是
就现在不能申请啊，就是你想进来是吧？看一下写的中国，
香港很会这一样的对待，不要给流下去。中国爱你，我爱你，祖国爱你，祖国爱你，祖国要把我玩死，我爱祖国啊！现在也不是只有香港在乱，泰国。泰国，你知道泰国是什么？那就照片其实是香港的这样。泰国现在也超可怕。泰国超可怕，你知道他的泰王，你只要对他不尊敬，他们那个你这样子比号召人际之事，我现在比这个我们也被抓了，好不好？那个中国的总统不上诉求啊！
中国不
你不可以害，对啊，你真的很糟糕。如果对他比中不自由，会吗？你不能说是太雄伟，太，可是很奇怪，他们迪士尼也卖小熊维尼，因为没有了吧？维国是迪士尼，去迪士尼的时候还一堆人排队跟小熊维尼。 习近平想去的可能去在做美颜，你可能没办法讲这种话，然后就跟小朋友一起12月去的。
你们想要挑战自己生命的极限，你们可以去北韩。
我觉得在中国跟北韩快差不多。
对，可以去北韩挑战一下。
他们说为什么北韩的那个汉肺炎那么少？就是因为有人做就把你打死。
就我们既然无法阻止病毒的蔓延，我们可以阻止你的移动。
我们可以阻止你生命的存活。对，我根本就不知道他打的是什么。你要相信他打的就是叫我多打什么。
老师，
哎，
你喝了吗？你喝了吗？
What do you say?
Did you have you drunk the coffee?
Yes. I forgot my coffee. Just a second.
电话的1000多人民币，1400多人民币，他说6针。6针分3次去。
Well, everyone, we actually got really good question from Ibnurian, and I think Poloser he will be happy for really smart questions, and let's see what is his answer.
你要吃到一般台湾那种level好吃的程度，那很贵，要40-50。他可能很适应当地吧。那边都是难吃到爆，随便吃的，也不知道你吃到那个肉是不是肉，狗肉。吃的真的都老死，他说的是牛肉。
不会，我跟你讲，上面
吃起来像是很强的
体院里面的学生没有这个问题。
化学肉。
然后身为体院的学生最骄傲是什么吗？他们吃东西有辅助的。
这种学生。
这怎么样能让体院学生吃的不好？
火腿炒饭，那个火腿吃起来就不是粉红色的，超粉的哎，超恶的，到底是？
红色该不是它是头的红色？
然后不是有那种 protein， 这是 protein， 一串的东西太恐怖了，那个你吃下去根本就不知道那是不是肉，真的觉得，我觉得那个是猪肉，我觉得那不是猪肉也不是牛肉，那应该就是狗肉、猫肉，我觉得上海都吃的很好。
哦。
上海已经算比较好。
没有吧？
上海消费也贵。
我觉得挺大的，就是的。可以哦。
Okay, 老师, we are ready, and we actually got 3 questions from my student. His name is Ibnu, and
Yes.
he asked about something quite important, I think. Question number 1, he said like this: when we take a look back to the process, to the set screen that you shared to us about glycolysis process, which is if we do have a oxygen present, then we are going the pyruvate going to be the carbon dioxide and H2O, but when we do not have the oxygen present, we are the pyruvate going to be the lactate. So question number 1, what else beside the CO2 and H2O, what else the end product for the glycolysis metabolism? That's question number 1. And question number 2, comparing ATP production from the anaerobic and aerobic system, which is from the plasma and also the mitochondria. When we talk about the ratio about the ATP production. How much is the ratio from the glycolysis and from the aerobic production? That question number 2. And question number 3. When we do long running, you mentioned that the peak of lactate production should be in the early minutes of running. So when we continuously running until, for example, 1 hour, so where does the lactate goes? Yeah, Laus. Is it clear enough? Mm.
Yes, there are many questions. Okay,
yeah,
let me.
3 questions.
Yeah. And actually, when you finish the last question, I forget your first question.
Okay, the first questions, beside the lactate and beside the CO2 as well.
Okay. Yeah.
What else?
Remember, yeah, this is very good question. So this question is actually related to how many pathways that glucose can go, right?
Correct.
So another way to say is how many products that can be produced from glucose. Okay, just give you one example. You know pentose pathway, right? Have you heard of this? Pentose pathway. You know pentose, right? Do you know pentose? 五糖，五碳糖，有听过吗？ Pentose pathway. Pentose is actually, you know, ribose. Have you heard of ribose? Ribose. 有听过 ribose 吗？ You know DNA and RNA, right?
Yeah.
If you make the DNA and RNA, you need sugar, and that is pentose.
Pentose.
In particular, ribose, right? And that is synthesized from glucose. Okay, so that is very good question, but we are not going to cover this in the lecture, but that is very important question. So that means that glucose not only function to provide energy for ATP synthesis, but also provide the carbon source for producing DNA and RNA. Okay, and keep in mind that in a multicellular system, the cells are dying and regenerating, right? When you are dying and regenerating, the DNA synthesis is always required. And that would also demand ribose coming from glucose. Okay, so that is very important question. Okay, the second question is, what is the ratio of anaerobic metabolism relative to aerobic metabolism to produce ATP? Okay, so that is very important question. So let me just give you a rough answer. Okay, so if you are doing for a competition and the distance is less than marathon, okay, marathon, you know marathon, right? The exercise you can sustain for 2 to 3 hours. So that is marathon. If you look at the marathon, 80% of the energy is coming from where? Glycogen. Okay? So that means the glycogen are extremely important for the endurance running. Okay? But if you look at, you know, glycogen can go aerobic and anaerobic, right? So what is the ratio of this? It depending on individual. Okay, so if you are trained individual and untrained individual are different. So if you have never trained, then you are rely more on anaerobic metabolism. compared to trained individual. Okay, please translate to your student. 那个刚刚他们问了一个非常重要的一个问题，就是第一个问题就是葡萄糖。
Jadi untuk pertanyaan pertama, Ibnu ini kan bertanya apakah proses glikolisis ini benar-benar tidak ada sisa residu baik yang dikeluarkan dalam lain atau yang di-recycle, Pak. Jadi tadi kan kalau kita lihat figur atau grafiknya itu kan ada 3 final product, ada 3 final product. Yang pertama tadi laktat. Jika kemudian tidak ada oksigen di dalam tubuh kita, maka jadi laktat. Kemudian yang berikutnya kalau ada oksigen dia akan menjadi karbon dioksida dan juga air H2O. Namun sebenarnya tadi Prof menyatakan bahwa apa yang dia sampaikan ini tidak ada di buku teks. Jadi ya ini hanya apa yang beliau baca gitu, dan apa yang beliau tahu. Produk akhir selain daripada karbon dioksida,
这个部分我相信大部分人在大学是没有学过。
glycolysis bentuknya adalah pentose dan ribosom.
糖尿病这个领域的人，他经常就会了解到，
pentose dan ribosom ini adalah bentuk akhirnya daripada akhir dari metabolisme karbohidrat. Dan terbentuknya pentose dan ribosom ini kemudian oleh tubuh kita dipakai untuk menjadi bahan penyusun DNA kita. Satu itu. Kemudian yang kedua, pertanyaan kemudian berapa jumlah perbandingan dari laktat dan mitokondria yang dihasilkan? Kalau Pali translate pertanyaan yang kedua ini jumlah ATP ya. Kalau jumlah laktat di mitokondria dia tidak ada laktat kayak gitu. Jadi yang menghasilkan laktat adalah metabolisme anaerob. Itu. Nah, kalau kita berbicaranya adalah rasio ATP yang dihasilkan dari proses metabolisme anaerob dengan aerobik. Tadi Prof Ko menyampaikan bahwa bahkan lari maraton bahan dasarnya adalah glikogen, bukan lemak. Begitu. Nah, nanti kalau pertanyaannya adalah, oke, kalau memang bahan dasarnya adalah glikogen, maka ada 2 kelompok. Satu orang terlatih, satu lagi orang tidak terlatih. Nah, kondisi ini yang membedakan berapa banyak ATP yang bisa diproduksi oleh tubuh. Jika pada orang-orang terlatih, proses glikolisis glycogen ini akan lebih banyak dibandingkan dengan orang yang tidak terlatih. Pertanyaannya perlu dijawab 2. Mungkin nanti setelah ini dijawab nomor 3. Mungkin dari Via bisa menambahkan sih, barangkali ada yang kelewat. Oke.
Okay, Ali, let me just add something more. That we talk about the trained and untrained endurance runner. It's going to have a different ratio for ATP production from aerobic versus anaerobic metabolism. And the reason that we have the big difference is because that trained individual normally have 3 major adaptations. The first is the trained individual tend to have higher oxygen consumption rate. So that is what we call aerobic capacity is higher. Okay, aerobic capacity is higher. And the reason that you have high aerobic capacity is mostly because of the trained individual has high plasma volume. Okay, high plasma volume. And therefore you want to know that if you train, that your body weight will increase, maybe on day 2. So you train today, tomorrow your body weight is going to increase, maybe half kilo. And the main reason for this increase is because you have more hydration due to plasma volume expansion. So that is one reason. Okay, you have a higher oxygen consumption rate compared to untrained. The second reason is the trained individuals tend to have a higher capillary density. Okay, not only you have a higher capillary density, but also you have a new capillary. Okay, capillary get old very fast. So when you train, then the capillary in blood vessel will renew faster. And therefore, you not only have more capillary in your muscle, but also you have new functional capillary in your muscle. So that is the second reason that train has higher aerobic metabolism ratio. And the third is the mitochondrial number inside the muscle. So the train runner, the train endurance runner tend to have 2 to 3 times of mitochondrial number compared to untrained. Okay, so that gives you the advantage that you can sustain your aerobic metabolism for ATP production compared to the untrained individual. Okay, so let's keep going. Okay. Okay, look at it right here again. Okay, glycolysis is taking place in cytosol. Okay, and when this is completed, when oxygen is available, then you goes to B. Sorry, I forgot to switch. Okay, right here. Okay, so glycolysis is taking place in the space we call cytosol, okay? But when oxygen is available, then the pyruvate goes to the direction of B, and therefore you have aerobic metabolism inside mitochondria, okay? So aerobic metabolism and aerobic metabolism is taking place on 2 different spaces inside the cell. 就有氧代谢跟无氧代谢，它在细胞内的进行的位置是不一样的。好，在有氧代谢是在粒线体内，无氧代谢是在细胞质。Okay, so that's why if you count the number of mitochondria is proportional to the aerobic capacity of the skeletal muscle. Okay, now I would like to show you that the glycolysis that takes place in cytosol. Okay, you look at right here, you have stage 1 and stage 2, right? This is the breakdown of 6 carbon glucose into 3 carbon pyruvate. Okay, you see glucose right here, and you see when glucose is phosphorylated, you can, this is stage 1, right? Okay, you see the yellow box is stage 1. 电脑看得到吗？看不到，好。你们好。Sorry. So we're talking now. We are talking about the glucose degradation inside the cytosol. And if you look at here, the glucose is going to transform into fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Okay, so if you are talking about glucose and fructose 1,6-phosphate, if you look at the size of the molecule, you immediately understand that the fructose 1,6-bisphosphate is bigger molecule compared to glucose because you have two phosphate bound to glucose, bound to fructose, right? So that means fructose 1,6-bisphosphate has more energy level, more potential energy compared to glucose. Okay, so if I ask you the question, fructose 1,6-bisphosphate and glucose, which one are thermodynamically unstable? Relatively speaking, which molecule are thermodynamically unstable? 好，你们来看哦，在葡萄糖分解的这个途径里面哈，你看到葡萄糖转化成这个 fructose F16BP， 对不对？好，那葡萄糖跟 F16BP 谁的热力学上的稳定性是比较差？没错 ，very good 。So we obviously we have already learned that the bigger molecule has more potential energy and therefore is less unstable, right? So that means the fructose 1,6-phosphate are very easy to be broken down compared with the glucose, right? 你们最近经常听到一个政治上面的一个语言，叫做养套杀，有听过这个吗？有听过这个语言吗？没有听过。好 ，OK。也就是说，当你要摧毁一个人，其实最好的方式是什么？你知道吗？就是你让他越来越骄傲，越来越骄傲，他骄傲到一个程度之后，他就会自我毁灭。有听过这个吗？资源一直给他，资源一直给他，资源一直给他，他累积大量的资源，他没有办法 hold 住这个资源，他整个系统就崩塌。Okay, so you want to know? So I'm giving the example that if you look at the glucose molecule, okay, the glucose molecule has 6 carbon, right? And the 6 carbon has high energy, but it's not high enough to cause immediate breakdown. Okay. And therefore, you can see this process, there are 2 ATP are investing energy into the glucose to make the glucose molecule are even higher energy, okay? So when the glucose becoming higher energy, then it is going to become a thermodynamically unstable. And it will eventually collapse into 3 carbon compound. Okay? You want to know this is very important philosophy. You know that if you are accumulating source, for example, wealth, okay, you are giving a lot of support for someone. For the kids, for example, if you have a kids and then you give a lot of resource, it's not helping your kids, right? Because when the kid cannot hold such amount of big energy, it will eventually collapse. And when this happens, then your wealth is going to go away. Okay, so it's also very, very common to see that if the people, they are becoming too cocky, right? And it's not very easy to be successful because you are feeding energy to the person and the person becoming increasingly, how to say, always satisfied, and always becoming, you know.
I think the term is spoiled, also. spoiled
yes,
person.
spoiled, yes,
Yeah.
then you know the humble person get help, right? And if you're not humble, then it's not going to be good for your survival, right? So the spoil is very good word. That so here you can see that we are quite spoiled for glucose molecule by giving 2 ATP, and therefore make the molecule high potential energy and then eventually collapse into 2 smaller compounds. So this is the strategy to break down the glucose. Okay. And then when this happens, the breakdown of the glucose is starting to have the leak out of the electron. Okay. So when the molecule breaks down, and remember that glucose is reducing compound, right? The reducing compound means this molecule has more electron, right? So when the system, when the molecule is broken down, the electron is going away, then you have a further decline of the energy. Okay, from here you can see where is the electron go. Can you see?
Yeah,
You
it
cannot see.
should be going to be NADH losses.
Yeah, that's right. You already learned this, right? But you cannot see from the picture. But if you look at this, okay, page 452. Okay, if you look at page 452, if you look at right here, you see right here, this oxidation is releasing electron to NAD+, and therefore you have generation of NADH, right? So when you see the NADH concentration increase, that means the electron is going away from glucose into the NAD, becoming NADH. This is what we call oxidation. Okay, so even you know that the glycolysis can occur without oxygen. Well, oxygen is the electron acceptor, right? And the alternative electron acceptor here is NAD+. So in your body and my body, we have electron acceptor, and that includes oxygen, the #1 source to accept electron. But when the oxygen is not available, the alternative source for accepting electron is NAD+. Okay, can you explain to your student? 跟大家简单的讲一下哈。
Oke,
就是不
jadi tadi dimulai dari awal
它就是2
molekul
个 ATP
glukosa
把能量
itu
捐
kan
给 捐
ketika
给它去
dia
形成
masuk
什
ke
么？
dalam
形成2
proses
个磷酸的共下键。
glycolysis,
所以一
dia
个葡萄糖
akan
加入2个磷酸
dirubah
之后，它又形成2个
menjadi
共下键，它变成一个非常大的一个分子。
1,6
它在热力学上面就变得不是很稳定，
biphosphate
它
glycerate
就
kalau
倾
paling
向于
nggak salah.
分解。
Nah,
所以它一分解之后，整个结构一崩
konsep
盘之后，它随
dari
带着电
glycolysis
势
sebenarnya
电势
terbagi menjadi 2 tahapan.
所以大家还记得吗？葡萄
Tahapan
糖
yang
它不是只有结
pertama
构大而已，而且它
dia
是
akan
还原性的。
mengkonsumsi energi,
它的
ya,
结构一
sedangkan
崩盘
tahapan yang
之后，
kedua
不但
dia
是结构变
akan
小，
mulai
它的电子流
memproduksi energi
那电子流失
dalam
会
bentuk
加速后面的
ATP.
继续崩盘，它
ATP
会一
itu
直流失，
adenosine triphosphate, unit yang paling
到后面就
sederhana
会看到
untuk
这个。
dipakai sebagai energi di dalam sel.
所以你可以看得到整
Nah,
个葡萄糖分解的反应，实际
tadi
上
sih
不是只有
beliau
六碳
menyampaikan
变
bahwa
成最
konsep
后
dari
一个碳，
glycolysis ini
你还发现它是
terutama
从还原
istilah
性的
dari
一个化合物，
oksidasi
最
gitu
后
ya.
升华。
Jadi
它能量是来
kalau
自于
Pali
两个部
tangkap
分，
itu istilah
一个部
oksidasi
分
di
是
sini adalah
6个
bukan
碳变一个碳，那第二个部
kita
分是
berbicara
从还原性电子
oksigen
流
lagi.
失掉。
Namun kalau sudah levelnya ke glycolysis metabolism, maka apa namanya oksidasi ini merupakan proses di mana elektron itu copot dari molekul terbesar dan didonorkan ke elektron reseptor. Ya. Tadi di sini dicontohkan NAD saja itu masih bentuk dari reseptor dari elektron. Jadi kalau NAD ini kemudian ditambahkan dengan satu gugus fosfat, maka NAD ini menjadi NADH. Dan NADH ini adalah bentuk bentuk komplit antara reseptor elektron dengan elektronnya. Nah, NADH, FADH ini ketika mereka terbentuk dalam proses glikolisis yang hari ini kita bicarakan, kemudian FADH akan terbentuk pada proses nanti di siklus Krebs. Ini yang nantinya kemudian akan lanjut ke proses selanjutnya yang disebut transport elektrolisis. Tadi Prof Ko juga menyampaikan bahwa apa namanya istilahnya itu ketika semakin ke bawah, molekul besar di dalam tubuh yang kita bicarakan adalah glukosa, dia sifatnya lebih stabil dan susah untuk di breakdown. Sedangkan tadi ya molekul turunan setelah glukosa itu ada 1,3 itu dia glukos 6 fosfat ya, dia akan dia merupakan molekul yang sudah mulai tidak stabil dan kemudian bisa dipakai dirubah untuk diurai menyumbangkan bentuk energi yang bentuknya adalah ATP. Begitu. Los Mego.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you for your interpretation. Okay, let us starting from the first chemical reaction is called group hexokinase, phosphorylation of glucose. Okay, you can see that this is glucose, right? On the right side, this is glucose. And the investment of the energy is coming from ATP. Okay, so that means if you don't have ATP in your cell, then you cannot go for the glycolysis. You got to have some ATP at the beginning. Okay, okay, and when glucose becoming glucose 6-phosphate, and you have ATP, glucose plus ATP has relatively higher potential energy, and therefore the direction is driving to this direction. So at the very beginning, you have phosphorylation of glucose. And this process is accelerated by an enzyme called hexokinase. Okay, so 大家有看到这个 hexokinase 这个酶。Okay, let me give you a very important knowledge in exercise physiology. If you train your muscle, okay, by endurance training, okay, for example, you run for 100, you run for, let's say, 30 minutes endurance running. And on day 2, you take out your muscle and measure the hexokinase mRNA. The hexokinase gene expression is going to increase about double. Okay, so that process can occur in 1 day. Okay, so that gives you the first idea that your muscle can adapt to metabolic stress by regulating the gene expressed in glycolysis. Okay, can you translate this to your student? 好，你们看到第一个 pathway 哈，就是
jadi apa yang sedang kalian lihat ini di atas ya, terutama ini adalah tahap pertama dari proses glikolisis. Yang tadi Pali bilang di tahap pertama ini glikolisis dia akan malah mengkonsumsi ATP bukan menghasilkan ya. Jadi di tahap pertama proses glikolisis ini malah mengkonsumsi ATP. Nah, saat glukosa ini kemudian prosesnya dibantu oleh enzim yang disebut hexokinase,
蛋白质的量
ya, dia akan menjadi
第一表现
molekul
大概是
lanjutan yang disebut
而且
dengan
它是立
glukos 6
体性的增
fosfat.
加。
Ya, dari glukos menjadi glukos 6 fosfat ini yang mana proses ini dibantu
这
oleh
给各位一个很重要
enzim
的
yang
一个
disebut hexokinase ini
Terus-
mengkonsumsi energi yang
知
disebut
道 hexokinase 的功能是什
ATP.
么？
Di sini ATP
实际
menjadi
上是把
ADP.
葡萄糖
Nah,
hold 在细
beliau
胞
tadi
里。
mencontohkan
你
bahwa
知道葡萄糖
olahraga-olahraga
的
yang
转
sifatnya endurance,
它是怎么样的一个
contoh
过程吗？
ketika kita lari
So you
disiplinnya
understand that
30 menit,
glucose is 葡
mungkin
萄糖它是
30
水溶性的
kilo
化
kali
合物
kali ya. Nah, ini
然后你们都知道细胞
konsentrasi
它
dari
是脂溶性的，
hexokinase di dalam
那
tubuh
葡萄
ini
糖要怎么
dia
进入
akan
细胞？
meningkat, ya. Proses peningkatan konsentrasi enzim hexokinase ini akan berlangsung
葡萄糖因
selama
为它水溶性，它
24 jam
要进入到细胞，
setelah
它
lari.
需要细胞膜有一个什么
Begitu.
东西
Jadi tadi yang disebutkan bahwa yang dilihat bukan hexokinasenya langsung, tetapi
细胞外它没有。
mRNA-nya. mRNA itu messenger ribonucleic acid-nya gitu. Jadi dia merupakan inisiasi yang mana menjadikan hexokinase aktif. Begitu. Yo,
Okay. Let me draw a graph right here. I hope you can see. So this is quite important for you to understand. This is a cell membrane. Okay, this is membrane. Okay, and this is your blood right here. And you have a glucose. Glucose right here, glucose right here, right? And you understand glucose is water soluble, right? So glucose cannot get in the cell because cell membrane is a lipid, right? Right? So glucose cannot get in unless you have a transporter right here. You have a transporter. Then glucose can get in. But the problem is glucose can also get out. So this is bidirectional. So what drives the direction? 好，我告诉各位哈，这个是葡萄糖转运蛋白，好，它是没有方向性的，所以葡萄糖可以进来，它也可以出去。
老师不好意思，
那问各位，葡萄糖的跑的方向是什么？
老师，
Yes.
Prof, I think you can stop to share screen first in order to make your screen wider so we can see what you draw for us.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you see this? Can you see the board? Okay, that's good. Okay, sorry.
Better.
Okay, so this is the cell, right? And you know the cell has the membrane, plasma membrane, and that is made by lipid.
Sorry, Laus. Can you unmute yourself? I'm sorry, I did it.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. So this is the cell, right? And this is the blood outside the cell. And in the blood, you have a lot of glucose, right? And glucose cannot get in cell without the transporter. Okay, so you have transporter on the plasma membrane, which allow glucose to get in. Okay, so glucose can get in. But the problem is the glucose can also get out, right? So what determines the direction? Yes, 这是标准答案。Is the concentration gradient. Okay, so if you have the concentration one side higher on compared to the other side, then the glucose is go to the direction that has the low concentration, right? So when you have the glucose get in, and when glucose get in, you always phosphorylated glucose by hexokinase, then the glucose concentration inside the cell will keep always low. And therefore, the glucose is much easier to be extracted by the muscle. Right? This is what we call glucose uptake. Can you see this? Glucose uptake. Okay, so muscle contraction will induce glucose uptake. Okay, let me give you the mechanism. This transporter is called GLU4 protein. You have learned this before, right? GLU4 protein. The GLU4 protein is located inside the cell, like this. This is GLU4 protein. When muscle is contracting, the GLU4 is going to translocation and incorporate it onto the plasma membrane. 所以肌肉在收缩的时候啊，你细胞内的这个 GLU4 它会跑到细胞膜表面。And as a result, you have a more glucose transporter there. And therefore, the glucose will get in immediately. So this is what we call contraction-stimulated glucose transport, or contraction-stimulated glucose uptake. Okay. This is transport. And when glucose is phosphorylated, then we call uptake, because it's not going back, right? Transport, you can always going back, right? But uptake, if it is phosphorylated, you cannot go back. Okay, this is very important term for you to learn, because this is one of most important area in exercise physiology, and also it's highly related to the area of nutrition and diabetes and muscle glycogen metabolism. 这个是很重要，这个知识很重要，因为它是在运动科学领域非常核心的一个领域，因为它涉及到糖尿病怎么解决，还有就是你的耐力会不会比较好，这个都是很重要的一个基准。So let me start over again. This is the plasma membrane. When muscle is contract, you have GLU4 translocation. That is the translocation of the GLU4 vesicle onto plasma membrane. We call GLU4 translocation. Okay, when this is happening, you are going to have the increased number of the GLU4 protein on the plasma membrane. And therefore, the glucose molecule would penetrate the plasma membrane into the cell. So the influx of the glucose down to its concentration gradient is going to be accelerated. So if you have enough hexokinase right here, the glucose will be converted into glucose 6-phosphate immediately. And therefore, the glucose is trapped inside the muscle cell. So this is not only important for glycogen accumulation, but also important for diabetes. Okay, so if you are able to increase the number of the glucose transport mechanism across the plasma membrane by any way, you are going to resolve the problem of the diabetes. So that's why, when you're talking about diabetes, you are always talking about exercise.
So is this a liver cell or is this a muscle cell?
Yes, this is a liver. This is a muscle cell. We talk about muscle contraction. Yeah.
Okay, so because
in liver, the glucose transporter is called GLU2, not GLU4.
GLUT4.
Yeah, GLU2.
Okay, so this is
liver.
This is completely new for me today, because I just receiving information from you that actually glucose, when it how to say that, it has been uptake get into the muscle. So is it also possible like exit it out of the cell? Is that what you are talking?
Can you say again?
So you're drawing the graph and you're explaining that the glucose when it has been uptaken by the muscle cell, so is it possible to like pop out from this muscle cell again like that?
Yes.
Is it
Depending
happen?
on yes, it's bidirectional. 他刚刚问了一个很重要的，葡萄糖进了细胞有没有可能出去？答案是有可能，因为它 transport 它是双向的 ，bidirectional. Yes, so it is possible. So the concentration gradient would decide where glucose is going.
Okay, well, because my understanding about it, anytime when the glucose from the bloodstream has been uptaken into the muscle cell, then it will never return out again. So it will be like used as the energy or stored as the glycogen. This is quite new.
Well, in reality, that's true. The reason is because you have the hexokinase right here. 刚刚他提到说，葡萄糖进来，在正常的生理状况之下，葡萄糖一进了细胞，有没有可能出去？在正常的状况，实际上如果说你没有 hexokinase, if you don't have a hexokinase, then glucose will go out. And the reason is because you have a glucose accumulation, right? But because we have the hexokinase right here, the glucose will not accumulate. It will go to this direction. And therefore you can say, okay, glucose has been uptaken.
Professor, the process of glucose transportation, glucose transport in the muscle cell is the same with in the liver cell? Is the same?
No, it's different. In liver cell, there's another different isoform of glucose transporter called GLU2. Okay, and the GLU2 is already on the plasma membrane, not like GLU4. GLU4 is stored inside the cell. OK， 他刚刚问了一个问题啊，就是肝脏的细胞跟肌肉的细胞，葡萄糖的转运机制有什么不一样？在肝脏的葡萄糖的转运蛋白叫做 GLU2， 它的位置是直接在细胞膜的表面，但是肌肉的话是在细胞的内部，只有在两种状况之下，它才会跑到细胞膜的表面。一种状态是有胰岛素的状况，第二种状态是在肌肉收缩。Okay, let me just do it in one more time. Okay. In most of the cell in human body, the glucose transporter are installed on plasma membrane. Okay, and there are many isoforms. There's GLU1, GLU2, and all the way to GLU12. So you have more than 12 isoforms of glucose transporter. Okay, and their function is to get glucose across the plasma membrane. And GLU4 is different. Okay, GLU4 has different subcellular location. Glucose 是比较不一样的，它的细胞的位置不是在细胞膜表面，在安静的状况之下是在细胞内。So GLUT4 is located inside the cell, and therefore under resting condition, it's not participating the glucose transport across the plasma membrane. Okay, and the GLUT4 only under strict circumstances would have translocation to plasma membrane. 只有3种状况之下，那个 GLUT4 才会跑到细胞膜的表面。The first condition is insulin stimulation. So when blood insulin concentration is going high, then it is going to have the GLUT4 translocation from inside of the cell into the plasma membrane of the muscle. The adipocyte has the same mechanism. 脂肪组织跟脂肪细胞有相同的机制，肌肉跟脂肪是一样的机制。Okay. The first one, insulin. The second is ischemia. What I mean ischemia is the oxygen concentration less than 5%. Okay. And the third is muscle contraction. So 3 different stimulus. Anaerobic stimulus is insulin. But ischemia and muscle contraction are catabolic stimulus. It also causes the translocation of GLUT4 protein to the plasma membrane. Okay, let me just give you a little bit more. Time is up, but I can just give you one more thing. You know, the intracellular GLUT4 protein are located in many places, and now it's still a mystery. Where is the GLUT4 is located inside the cell? 就是 GLUT4 在肌肉细胞的内部，实际上是有很多的位置都有，但是具体在哪些位置还不是100%的清楚。Okay, and the people found that if you have insulin stimulation, you see the GLUT4 translocation from certain site to the plasma membrane. And when you have the muscle contraction, you also have the GLUT4 translocation from different site into plasma membrane. So that means insulin and muscle contraction are recruiting different pool of the GLUT4 to the plasma membrane. 这个很重要，这个对各位来讲非常重要的知识。你知道，在肌肉收缩的时候 ，GLUT4 会跑到细胞膜表面，胰岛素的刺激也会使 GLUT4 跑到细胞膜表面。那有人做过这个研究，就是它的 GLUT4 可以被胰岛素动员的，跟被肌肉收缩所动员的，它们是不是来自于相同的位置？结果发现它们不是来自相同的位置。Okay, so if you found that the insulin stimulated GLUT4 pool are different from the contraction stimulated GLUT4 pool, then people are get very excited. You know why? Why people get excited on this? 科学家知道这个资讯之后是非常开心的。为什么很开心？ Because you understand the fact that the plasma membrane, if you have a more GLUT4 on the plasma membrane, then it's going to accelerate the glucose uptake from blood into the muscle cell, right? So you have 2 benefits. The first benefit, the blood glucose is going to be lower, right? And the second advantage is the muscle glycogen is going to be higher, right? So you improve your fitness and you lower your blood glucose. So the people get very excited on this knowledge, right? So there are a lot of people are study the insulin stimulated glucose transport, and there are all other people study contraction stimulated glucose transport. And what is the molecular signal to regulate both pathways? And if you can produce any molecule that can stimulate both, then you are going to resolve the problem of diabetes. And also you can improve your glycogen storage. So these are one of the hot area that is studied actually by your senior. Adi, you know Stanley, right? Stanley Lai.
Yep, the senior who is now staying in Belgium, right?
Actually, he got a job in University of Birmingham.
Oh,
he's teaching. Yeah, he's teaching.
Birmingham.
Yeah, in University of Birmingham, which is one of the. And he's actually studied this area. So, so next time you can if you have time, you can visit him in Birmingham. He is very easygoing person. Yeah, he is going to give. Oh, actually, he is going back to Taiwan next year for the Asian Nutrition Conference.
When is it, Lause? I mean, on what month?
Next summer.
Next summer.
Yeah. Try to come. Try to apply.
I will. Well, yeah. I need a time from you that I want your advice and just discussions about what should I do. But of course, not this time because now it's class.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, very important for the university. Okay. Yeah. So today I'm going to close my lecture today. Okay. So see you next week.
Yeah, so actually we have 3 questions, but I will keep it and I will ask to you next week because next week we also still talking about it. Thank you so much for today.
Okay.
We will see you again next week, Prof.
Okay. All right. See you. Take care.
Thank you so much. Yep. Oke, jadi kompleks sekali apa yang tadi didiskusikan oleh Prof. Kuo. Bahkan jujur ada hal baru yang hari ini Pali pelajari. Jadi setahu saya di konsepnya saya ya ketika gula itu sudah masuk ke dalam sel otot, yaitu tidak bisa keluar lagi gula itu. Ya gula itu ya harusnya dipakai sebagai sumber energi dan kalau katakanlah tidak dipakai sebagai sumber energi ya maka gula itu harusnya disimpan dalam bentuk glikogen. Namun hari ini surprisingly ya Prof. Ko menyampaikan sesuatu yang berbeda dan Pali jujur belum tanya juga karena memang kita punya beberapa pertanyaan dan belum Pali tanyakan. Pertanyaannya adalah kondisi itu apakah di orang sehat juga sama? Apakah kondisi itu hanya di orang sakit saja? Itu belum terjawab. Minggu depan kita akan ketemu lagi dengan Prof. Kuo. Pertanyaan dari Aunur, pertanyaan dari Trahisa, dan pertanyaan dari Mbak Etika. Itu nanti akan saya tanyakan minggu depan. Dan juga pertanyaan saya juga pribadi ke beliau yang tadi belum terjawab. Jadi untuk kalian yang bukan dari IPA, mungkin ini tuh pelajaran apa, ini yang jelas ini bukan ilmu klinik ya. Jadi kalau kalian pengen belajar tentang biokimia, maka dasar awalnya sebenarnya kalian harus tahu tentang sel. Ya, jadi perbedaan sel uniseluler sama multiseluler itu apa, organelnya apa, fungsinya apa, dan lain sebagainya. Kemudian apa yang sedang kita pelajari kan jauh di bawah sel. Kita sedang berbicara tentang molekular. Memang kita dituntut dalam mata kuliah ini adalah penalaran yang lebih dalam. Jadi di samping penalaran juga imajinasi yang lebih dalam supaya benar-benar paham apa yang disampaikan oleh Prof. Kuo. Paling yakin kalau seandainya memang belajar itu kuncinya ikhlas. Jadi kalau Prof. Kuo-nya sudah ikhlas memberikan, kitanya harus ikhlas menerima kayak gitu. Jadi supaya transfer knowledge-nya itu dapat, saya yakin ini akan sangat berguna untuk kalian yang nantinya jauh di masa depan akan bekerja sebagai instruktur ataupun mungkin sebagai pelatih atau mungkin bahkan fitness consultant ya konsultan kebugaran dan lain sebagainya, bahkan untuk diri sendiri. Karena pemahaman biokimia Pali pribadi merasa saya menemukan jawaban yang di awal Pali sampaikan, jawaban mengapa olahraga bisa menjadikan kita lebih sehat. Begitu, terima kasih untuk hari ini, tetap semangat. Besok meskipun libur sebenarnya, namun jurusan kita sudah kontak dengan 2 narasumber. Yang satu adalah dokter spesialis keolahragaan Andi Kurniawan. Beliau sangat expertise mendampingi tim-tim nasional di ajang internasional seperti Olimpik, SEA Games, dan lain sebagainya. Sangat related dengan apa yang menjadi mata kuliah ampunya Pak Ali. Dan untuk kalian yang mungkin rada boring dengan olahraga kesehatan, besok juga kita punya satu lagi ya narasumber, yaitu Pak Atam. Dia pemilik ya katakanlah kayak bukan resort ya, tapi tempat untuk bisnis sport tourism. Jadi kiat-kiat sukses dalam menjalankan sport entrepreneurship. Ya, jadi tetap semangat. Besok sampai ketemu besok. Kalian login Zoom 8:30. Jam 9 dengan Dr. Andy, sampai jam 10 dengan Pak Atam. Begitu kiranya dari Pali. Terima kasih, tetap semangat. Selamat sore. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.